I've actually improved upon Tolkien's prose. I know, crazy, right? How did I manage to do that? Listen. 3 rings for the musicians' fingers on their lyre. 7 for the art painters in their easelled homes. 9 for mortal writers doomed because of AI. 1 ring for the content creator behind her microphone in the land of YouTube where strangers drop by. 1 video to rule them all. 1 video to find them. 1 video to bring them all. And from the land of Down Under, force them all to read The Lord of the Rings by JRR Tolkien right along with her as she reads it for the very first time. Hi, I'm Georgie. I am reading through The Lord of the Rings by JRR Tolkien, starting with The Fellowship of the Ring. Today we are reading the chapter 1, which is called A Long Expected Party, and I am reading it at the same age that Frodo turned, the night of the Long Expected Party, which is also the night that he came of age, according to Hobbit lore. And the same night, Frodo and Bilbo sharing the same birthday, which I did not know. If you haven't already seen my video discussing the foreword and the prologue, that I will link that here and below. And just some housekeeping stuff is that these are super casual thoughts and videos. There is no order to them. They are by no means a recap of the chapter. They're just things that tickle my brain that I want to talk about. And the other reminder is that I have read the Silmarillion, so I'm coming to these books with more knowledge than what a lot of people would have had reading them for the first time. And also an announcement which completely overrules the announcement that I made in my previous video, and that is that yes, I'm going to read The Hobbit, but probably will read it after book 1 of, because book 1 is called, book 1. So after book 1, which is the first 12 chapters or so, I will then go back to read The Hobbit, which is then just before the Council of Elrond. So hopefully that will work out. That's my basic plan. Yes, things are subject to change because, yep. So this was a really cute chapter. Before I get to my thoughts, I kind of wanted to touch on a couple of things that I remember reading in Tolkien's letters about writing chapters, and especially about starting this book. I have this book, which is the revised and expanded edition of the letters of JRR Tolkien, which, look, it's quite a big book. There are a lot of letters, and this is not even, you know, this would have been like a small portion of the letters that he wrote. They're just the ones that people happen to have kept around. And I've read about half of it, but there's a couple here at the beginning. I'll read it out to you. It's letter number 23, if anyone is interested, addressed to someone at Allen and Unwin, a publishing company. Tolkien is 46 years old at this time in 1938, and basically he's struggling with chapter 1 of the sequel to The Hobbit. He hasn't even got a name for it or anything yet. He's just like, The Hobbit sequel. And he says, "They say it is the first step that costs the effort. I do not find it so. I am sure I could write unlimited first chapters. I have indeed written many. The Hobbit sequel is still where it was, and I have only the vaguest notions of how to proceed. Not ever intending any sequel, I fear I squandered all of my favourite motifs and characters on the original Hobbit." So that's just hilarious. So basically Tolkien's, in this moment, is sort of in the headspace that he could write 1,000 chapter 1s because he doesn't really have a notion of how the story is going to go ahead. So it's really easy to write a chapter 1 because you've got no anchors, you've got nothing that you're held accountable for in chapter 1. And not only that, but he's like, well, all of my really good ideas I already distilled and then siphoned straight into The Hobbit. So now I don't have any of my cool things that I want to use anymore. Which is interesting because people obviously want more of the same because they want a sequel. So technically he could recycle a lot, and I'm sure he did. Like Hobbits were, you know, the main part of the story still. So I just find it so interesting to read these letters alongside Lord of the Rings, because it's just seeing the emotions of Tolkien and his like very human and real struggles at the same time of having the benefit of what actually happened and the success that he had. It's obviously makes reading these letters really, really sweet. There's another letter, letter 24, which is also to Stanley Unwin, who's, I think, one of the big publisher guys, that basically says a similar thing. I find it only too easy to write opening chapters, and for the moment the story is not unfolding. I have squandered so much on the original Hobbit, which was not meant to have a sequel, that it is difficult to find anything new in that world. It's just so funny to read. Just knowing the overwhelming success of The Lord of the Rings and then coming back to read these is sweet and cute and humbling, and I think a deep reflection of a lot of our own insecurities and failings, where we tell ourselves that we can't possibly take on a task, but then one step after another we manage to do it, and when we look back we can't imagine how far we've come from the beginning when it felt like we had nothing. But yeah, no, it's just so interesting to read all of this. If anyone is reading The Lord of the Rings for the first time and you're interested in just getting a little bit of a sneak peek behind the curtain, I do recommend this book, but I don't think it takes away from your ability to be immersed in the story at all by knowing the person behind the story, because there are different parts of your brain. Like there's the part of your brain where you can get immersed in a world, and then there's a part of your brain where you can meta-analyze it from the outside. Like they're different parts. Onto the actual chapter 1. His remarkable disappearance and unexpected returns. This is on page 29. So Bilbo is now doing another remarkable disappearance, essentially. So I can imagine, yeah, that Tolkien was kind of like, well, there was a really sudden disappearance of Bilbo last time, and now I want to make like a similar thing. Hobbits are so very relatable in a few of their behaviours. One of them here, it's written here, there were some that shook their heads and thought this was too much of a good thing. It seemed unfair that anyone should possess perpetual youth as well as inexhaustible wealth. With regards to Bilbo, who wasn't aging, was clearly very rich. It will have to be paid for, they said. It isn't natural and trouble will come of it. I think it's always those little dark thoughts we have when you see someone that seemingly, at least externally, has it all. Like, I can certainly relate to these hobbits being like, well, something has to be wrong about that person's life. They can't have everything. Obviously, there are some people out there who can have everything, and it makes no sense to bemoan them. I always wondered watching, and the context is that I have actually watched the Lord of the Rings movies, so I have a rough idea of how things go plot-wise, like the big events. And though I have not watched the movies for quite a long time, one thing I always wondered was what was the relationship between Frodo and Bilbo, because they clearly weren't father and son, and they didn't even seem like they were nephew and uncle. Why was it that Bilbo was kind of kept to himself his whole life? I mean, I think it's hard to say how Bilbo would have been if all the events of the Hobbit book hadn't happened, but obviously being one of the very few hobbits who has gone away and returned from an adventure, he would probably feel less of an affinity towards a lot of hobbits than he otherwise would have, which is why he has been kept himself as a bachelor, which I think at some point around here is described as quite unusual. I can't remember where, but it is described as quite an unusual thing to be a bachelor as a hobbit, and that most hobbits do live with a lot of family. Like it would be quite rare to see single hobbits, or even, which is an interesting thought, because I'm pretty sure like the last census that we had in Australia, with the highest amount of single dwellers in single homes ever, we are getting many, many more people live in our age by themselves. Interesting thought. But Frodo also technically is living the bachelor life, and they're living it together. So they are cousins or second cousins, 16 years or something like that prior to the party. They move in together, and Bilbo adopts Frodo as his heir, which is also kind of cool to learn, because I didn't really pick that up watching the movies as a kid. I just kind of ignored and brushed over their relationship. So they're related. Bilbo happens to like Frodo especially, and adopts Frodo as his heir, which is why then Frodo gets the ring, etc., etc. And Bilbo obviously waits until this 11-1 birthday, because Frodo is going to be 33 then, which means that because he's coming of age, he can now inherit all of Bilbo's wealth. And that is the day that Bilbo has then decided to disappear. So that's quite a cute little timing that I just didn't appreciate watching the movies, which is great. So there is basically, if you have a look at the map of the Shire, there is a little area called Buckland, and that is apparently, and Brandy Hall, that is apparently where Frodo initially grew up before Bilbo kind of adopted him. And it's because it's near the Old Forest. I think a lot of hobbits just, I mean, it's noted here that it beats me why any Baggins of Hobbiton should go looking for a wife away there in Buckland, where folks are so queer. Baggins is his name, but he's more than half a brandybuck. For some reason, brandybucks are kind of not teased, but what's the word? Like, if you're brandybuck, you're going to get some eye rolls, or like, it's not as respectable as a Baggins or something like that. But yeah, apparently looking for a wife in Buckland is quite a queer thing to do. So down there in Buckland, Old Master, and this is on the next page, 31, Old Master Gorbodoc never had fewer than a couple hundred relations in the place. Mr. Bilbo never did a kinder deed than when he brought the lad back to live among decent folk. So people are pretty happy in general that Bilbo actually took Frodo out of that. And it kind of sounds like they were all inbred down there in Buckland. Interesting. We find out that Frodo's father drowned, and his mother, I don't know. Did I miss that? I don't know. So that explains why Frodo never, he just left the Shire without saying goodbye to any family, because him and Bilbo, they were the closest person they had was each other. So there weren't many close people to say goodbye to, which is very unusual for hobbits. It says here, hobbits have heard this and darker rumours before, referring to the drowning of Frodo's dad. But hobbits have a passion for family history, and they are ready to hear it again. Being a hobbit is just basically, this is another relatable thing. It's going through nostalgic things and retelling stories in different ways that you've already heard before and that you already know the comfortable ending of, so there's no surprises. But, there are times when we rewatch the same shows, reread the same books, eat the same meals that we always eat when we are in the mood for just not having any new surprises. And so, yeah, very relatable, hobbits. There's a bunch of people called the Sackville Bagginses, which were supposed to be heirs to Bilbo, but aren't very nice. And they're quite funny, actually. But Gaffer, who is Samwise Gamgee's dad, Ham Gamgee, defends Bilbo and his generosity by saying, Bilbo is free with his money and there seems no lack of it, but I know of no tunnel making. Because everyone thinks Bilbo's got a hoard of treasure, like Dragon Hoard or something like that. So it makes sense, because this old Gaffer is Bilbo's gardener, and so is one of the next closest people to Bilbo, and Sam as his son comes to know Bilbo and Frodo because he's taking over that job, which makes a lot of sense. Because I think I vaguely do remember that Sam is a gardener. Not necessarily like, not that hobbits have nobles, but like he's definitely like more of like a working class hobbit. But because gardening is such a big part of like a hobbit's life, you'd probably be quite close to your gardener, especially because it seems like a lot of hobbits home grow a lot of food. It's noted here that Sam is crazy about stories of the old days and listens to all of Mr. Bilbo's tales. Mr. Bilbo has learnt him his letters, so Bilbo taught Sam how to read, and it's just so nice because we do know that Sam likes stories, and it's just so beautiful. Well, I mean, it's beautiful because I think Sam is one of the few people who's like, oh my gosh, the elves, let's go see the elves, that's amazing. And probably turned over a lot of Bilbo's stories in his heads, like we turn over stories in our heads. There's a funny note here about Gandalf, the wizard whose fame in the Shire was due mainly to his skill with fires, smokes and lights. His real business was far more difficult and dangerous, but Shire folk knew nothing about that. He's just known as like the fire wizard who like makes things go bang. It's quite funny. There's a really beautiful line on page 33 where Gandalf arrives at Bag End, and it says here, the late afternoon was bright and peaceful. The flowers glowed red and golden, snapdragons and sunflowers and nasturtiums trailing all over the turf walls and peeping in at the round windows. You can completely imagine, like the Shire is one of those places where I can imagine that back in the day where you bake a pie and put it on the windowsill to cool off, you would put it there and the nasturtiums and the snails and the ladybugs would be crawling all around that little sill. So beautiful. So beautiful, especially because I've got nasturtiums all through my backyard at the moment. So the biggest change from plot that I've noticed from this book to the movies is that Gandalf and Frodo are in on Bilbo's plan to disappear today and to leave. They're both aware of it. They're both somehow aware that Bilbo has a ring that makes him disappear, which I find wild as to why Gandalf hasn't kind of been concerned about this more than before now. Because it seems like Gandalf definitely that he's gonna, just suddenly disappear. Well, he says here, you mean to go on with your plan then? And Bilbo's like, yes, I made my mind up months ago. He could just be referring with the plan to leave the Shire. It seems that Gandalf actually knows everything because he says, stick to your plan, your whole plan, mind, and I hope it will turn out for the best. So by Gandalf saying your whole plan, it seems like he knows that Bilbo has the ability to disappear, which means Gandalf knows all about the ring and the episode with Gollum and hasn't done anything. Like, are we assuming at this point that Gandalf literally knows that this is the one ring, but kind of hasn't acted on it for 60 years, or however long when he got the truth out of Bilbo about it, because he knew that it was safe and quiescent and quiet, and he knew that if he maybe looked into it, he would set off events that would have the shadows creep in sooner rather than later, and tried to give as much peace to Bilbo as possible whilst he held on to it. Also knowing that Bilbo was a very safe person to hold on to have the ring because he's a hobbit and not a wizard, not an elf, and that Sauron didn't really anticipate his ring falling into the hands of such humble, harmless creatures, that he probably didn't anticipate that pretty much hobbits can suppress the power of the ring for many, many years at a time just because of their nature. Like, I find that quite funny that they're a really good buffer between the world and the ring. Sauron's like creating this ring. He's like, anyone who touches it is not going to be able to resist its power ever for even a day. Nope. Hobbits are like not a particularly power hungry kind of crew, you know? They'd probably look at the ring and think it's just like not worth the effort. Anyway, we get to a whole thing about the actual party itself. Bilbo's sending out invitations which literally block up the post office because he invites what sounds like half the Shire, and then they have to respond via post. I forget about this, that you have to receive a letter but also respond by sending another letter. You can't just, you know, when we get invitations these days, you often get like a beautiful paper invite to a wedding, but you respond via email or text. But I find it kind of a bit crazy that they had to get voluntary assistant postmen called out just to start posting things. Like, I mean, I guess they had to get all the invites out within like a day or 2 or 3 of each other, because you couldn't send them out over 2 weeks because people would be going unsure if they were going to get invited. But wow, there are lots of preparations. There are dwarves. So that's another big change, is that there are dwarves here, 3 dwarves scuttering around helping with all these preparations that arrived at some point before the party, not too long before. They are not named dwarves, and I don't think they're ever going to be named, so we don't know who they are. Are they dwarves literally from The Hobbit, or are they just other dwarves that Bilbo happens to know? Nah, they're probably people he knows from The Hobbit, but they're just not named here. For an odd reason. I wonder why they're not named. And there's no reason not to name them. There's a beautiful description here of the fireworks by Gandalf on page 35. There are a generous distribution of squibs, crackers, bacca-rappers, sparklers, torches, dwarf candles, elf fountains, goblin barkers, and thunderclaps. They were all superb. The art of Gandalf improved with age. I love that. And even more description of what the actual fireworks looked like. There were fountains of butterflies that flew glittering into the trees. So beautiful. Fountains of butterflies that flew glittering into the trees. Pillars of coloured fires that rose and turned into eagles. Wow. Eagles is a very interesting choice of bird, and I love it. Or sailing ships, or a phalanx of flying swans. Flying swans. The bird choice here is on point. And definitely, I mean, the Teleri, obviously, they had their swan boats. Swans are a very important animal to a huge bunch of elves over in the West. And because they pulled them there, right? Am I wrong about that? No, I think I'm right about that. And eagles rescue many a hobbit/elf in many a time. There was a red thunderstorm and a shower of yellow rain. There was a forest of silver spears that sprang suddenly into the air with a yell like an embattled army, and came down again into the water with a hiss like 100 hot snakes. That was, I think, is my favourite one. A forest of silver spears, like army spears. How do we not have more advanced fireworks? And then, of course, there was a dragon. The dragon passed like an express train, turned a somersault, and burst over Bywater with a deafening explosion. And this caused some hobbits to fall flat on their faces. Of course, an express train. There were definitely express trains in Middle-earth. That would have really helped our journey. But we don't have Merry and Pippin pulling that prank, which is really interesting. That addition. We don't have them pulling the prank with the dragon firework, where they're like, no, get the big one, you know what I'm talking about? So that was, they don't even really make much of an appearance at all. And then we get to Bilbo's speech, which pretty much none of the hobbits are looking forward to, because they don't want a really long speech that involves philosophy and poetry. That I can't relate to, but anyway, that's okay. They just want to be able to cheer people to good health and like hear themselves echo around in cheer, like to the point where at one point when Bilbo gets up to stand, they're all going, "Hear, hear," and no one can like hear Bilbo because they're all just like they're so excited and trying to quiet each other down that they're making more noise by trying to shut each other up. Just because it's like a fun spirited echo, you know? They were sipping their favourite drinks and nibbling at their favourite dainties, and their fears were forgotten. So we're definitely at the point where these hobbits are prepared to listen to anything and to cheer at every full stop. They're definitely like, they've had quite a bit of wine. I feel like that all hobbits have a high tolerance. But anyway, don't know what filling up the corners means exactly. And then we get the speech, which is so eerily similar in so many ways to what we got in the movies, but also different in other ways. It was interesting to actually read them, to read it and be like, well, that was in there, that wasn't, and just to reflect on the different choices that would have been made. In fact, the movie overall was just a lot more, Bilbo was a lot more, less cheery. He was a lot more solemn. Than in this book. And same with Gandalf. Like, there seemed to just be a lot more cheery exclamation marks in the dialogue in the book compared to the movie. And then Bilbo disappears. This is the end. I'm going, I'm leaving now, goodbye. And there's a blinding flash of light. Oh yeah, okay. Gandalf made the blinding flash of light. So Gandalf was definitely in on the plan of Bilbo disappearing, yes. And so was Frodo. And just those three, pretty much, and the dwarves. I assume the dwarves knew. But like, it's just so strange that Gandalf did nothing until now. In the movie, you get Frodo being completely shocked by Bilbo's disappearance. It must be a secret that Bilbo and Frodo keep. Like, Bilbo has at one point told Frodo that I have a ring that magically makes me disappear. But don't tell anyone? Like, I mean, Frodo wouldn't have, but it's also kind of weird because, you know, when we see, it's not described yet in the book, but from the movies, every time Frodo put the ring on, it's not like he would become invisible and exist in the same realm. It's like he almost stepped into a realm of darkness, a realm of shadows. And so it's a very unpleasant place to be in, which kind of makes me think that maybe back when Bilbo was using the ring more frequently to disappear, because the shadows were still really low and hadn't increased yet, and Sauron's power was still much lower, maybe it wasn't so bad when he went into that realm every time he disappeared, but got a lot worse when Frodo was around. I don't know. Bilbo gets back home and looks like he basically leaves everything behind except like a bunch of things that smell like mothballs, like an old cloak and a hood that was too big for him. So I'm assuming this is something that belonged to a dwarf or something like that from The Hobbit. Gandalf comes back to Bilbo after the trick and says, "You have wisely kept that ring secret all these years, and it seemed to me necessary to give your guests something else that would seem to explain your sudden vanishment." So Gandalf thought he'll make a lightning bolt, something equivalent to a lightning bolt, come through, which apparently fizzles Bilbo away. Bilbo's like, "Well, I expect you know best as usual." And Gandalf says, "I do, when I know anything." As in, like, if Gandalf is only sure of things when he knows it's the right thing. "But I don't feel too sure about this whole affair, and now it's come to a final point. You've had your joke, people will be talking about it forever. Are you going to go any further?" Bilbo's like, "Well, that's it for me. Like, he's leaving. Like, I'm old." This is the line that is taken from the book. So much is taken from the actual book. It's crazy. Into the movies. Especially this line, which is one of my favourites. "I feel thin, sort of stretched, if you know what I mean, like butter that has been scraped over too much bread. I need a change or something." There's a couple of cute lines by Bilbo. He says, "I might find somewhere where I can finish my book. I've thought of a nice ending for it. And he lived happily ever after to the end of his days." And then he says, this is on page 41, "I want to see the wild country again before I die, and the mountains. But he," referring to Frodo, "is still in love with the Shire, with woods and fields and little rivers." And we have the same thing where Bilbo thinks he puts the ring into an envelope on the mantelpiece, but actually keeps it in his pocket, as if there's something unconscious that is tethering himself to the ring, or the ring to him. Which is an unusual thing, because I was thinking, if the ring wanted to be found by someone evil, wouldn't it naturally want to repel itself from a hobbit, who seem to be the most steadfast creatures to bear it? But no, it seems that across the board it instills in someone a feeling of possession that changes the personality and their emotions. It actually changes the emotion of the person without them being aware of it.
George, your mum's here.
Oh, really? Oh, geez, she said she'd be here at 2:00. I mean, it's interesting, this chapter. It's not like much happens, really. So it honestly just feels like it's very narrative-like. When Gandalf is like, where's the ring? Bilbo's like, well, it's in the envelope on the mantelpiece. Well, no, it is here in my pocket. Isn't that odd? He said softly to himself. So he's speaking softly now, as if to himself. Like he's done this many times before. Yes, after all, why not? Why shouldn't it stay here? And then when Gandalf inquires further, he's like, well, why do you want me to? And a curious change came over his voice. It was sharp with suspicion and annoyance. You were always badgering me about my ring, but never about anything else. So, I don't know. I was trying to look this up before. At the beginning of the movies, Galadriel's voice talks about how Sauron poured his will to dominate and his malice and all of his hatred into the ring. So that is seeping out. I don't think that his malice and his hatred and his will to dominate seep out so much, because even it feels like it's not like Bilbo is becoming filled with hatred or the will to dominate. It's more like he has the desire to possess the ring and keep it upon himself. And I just wonder if that was something that Sauron intended. It's really interesting to think about. If you were to make a magic ring, and let's just say that you were giving yourself an insurance policy in the event that the ring is cut off from your hand and lost for thousands of years, what sort of properties would you want to embed into that ring? Would you want it to be really good at remaining hidden and for people not want to hold on to it? Or would you want people to be attracted to it and to want to hold on to it? You would want people to hold on to it, because if people didn't want the ring, then it would constantly be left at the bottom of a lake. So you would want people to fight over it. Also, because Sauron's evil, he would probably just want people to gradually become so possessive that they are willing to murder their friends over it, like Smeagol had done. So, but it's just interesting if that's an accident or on purpose. And I honestly don't think we have. I tried to look up if there was information on this and I couldn't really find anything, but it's a very interesting thought project. The wizard's face remained grave and attentive, and only a flicker in his deep eyes showed that he was startled and indeed alarmed by Bilbo's sudden change of behaviour. It has been called that before, he said, but not by you. So Gandalf knows that this ring is Smeagol's and knows that Gollum called it that. So does he know it's the One Ring? Or Sauron's ring? I don't really know what they actually call it. Collectively, they're known as rings of power. I'm also really interested to know about other rings of power in, like, Middle-earth and the Lord of the Rings in general. Like, imagine if there was just a really good elven smith who just made a series of magical rings, but no one ever talks about them because they are dwarfed by, or like he goes out of business because he makes magical rings, but then, you know, Sauron kind of ruins that for everyone and no one's keen to have a magical ring, even if it, I don't know, means that your scones taste better if you cook with the ring on. So give us a magical necklace, but not a magical ring, thank you. Stop enchanting rings. Okay, we have more insight as to the power of the ring over Bilbo here. Bilbo says on page 43, "It would be a relief not to be bothered with it anymore." Now that his head is cleared, you know. It has been so growing on my mind lately. Sometimes I have felt like an eye was looking at me, I'm always wanting to put it on and disappear, don't you know? Or wondering if it is safe and pulling it out to make sure. I tried locking it up, but I found I couldn't rest without it in my pocket. I don't know why, and I don't seem able to make up my mind. So it muddles the mind. It's like it's confused Bilbo. And yes, he couldn't lock it away and keep it secret. It wants to be known. No, sorry. It doesn't want to be known. It wants to be possessed, because if it wanted to be known, one might think it would have tried to get away from Gollum. But that is an interesting thought experiment as to, like, how did Gollum drop the ring in the first place? Anyway, like, did the ring will itself to be dropped? No, I think that seemed like chance. But yeah, it's not like it wants to be found. It just wants to remain in possession, and it slowly drives that person mad and drives them to do things they wouldn't otherwise do, creates more evil. Yeah, I mean, if I was making a magical ring and I was Sauron, I would instill within it properties of whoever picks it up slowly is turned to be one of my servants and searches for a way to get it back to me. But even with who was it? The man who died floating upside down on a lake, who had the ring. Was that Isildur? And then it lay at the bottom of the lake for centuries to millennia. That man didn't have a desire to return it to Sauron. He had a desire to keep it and possess it, and it drove him to greed and gluttony, whatever. Anyway, it's just interesting that that's the trait that... I'm talking too much about that. I really love the detail here. Like, it's just so cool. Also on page 43, Bilbo basically admits that, after all, that's what this party business is all about, really, to give away lots of birthday presents, because on their birthdays, hobbits give away presents. Very cool idea. To give away lots of birthday presents and somehow make it easier to give it away at the same time. It hasn't made it any easier in the end, but it would be a pity to waste all my preparations, and it would quite spoil the joke. So basically Bilbo was like, I'm struggling to give this ring away, but maybe if I'm in the habit of giving many, many things away in this massive party, I will somehow be able to give the ring away. And let's be real, if Gandalf hadn't have been there at that time, Bilbo wouldn't have given the ring to Frodo. He would have taken it with him to Rivendell, and that would have been a very intriguing and interesting story, because the ring wraiths that were sent to then look for Baggins in the Shire, I'm assuming that's what's going to happen in the next chapter. I haven't yet read the next chapter. I'm basing this off the movies. Will completely miss the trail of Bilbo because he'd left... Bilbo seems like he had a very easy way to get to the Shire compared to Frodo, to get to Rivendell compared to Frodo. And then it's safely there. But Gandalf would have known about it, so either way, the Council of Elrond probably would have happened. But Frodo wouldn't have been there. Anyway, you can see the up and down emotions of Bilbo trying to give this ring away. And then we have... Oh, and then he leaves, and the dwarfs follow him out, 3 dwarfs. So he doesn't just leave by himself. He does have companions, but we still don't know who they are. Very, very cool. There's... what Bilbo starts singing as he's travelling is, the road goes ever on and on, down from the door where it began. Now far ahead the road is gone, and I must follow if I can. And then my favourite bit is the next bit. Pursuing it with eager feet until it joins some larger way where many paths and errands meet. And whither then I cannot say. That is such a great little poem. Really funny bit here. This is the bit that made me laugh, actually. Gandalf is so funny without meaning to be. So Frodo looks at the ring. He's like, the ring, he's left me that. I wonder why. Still, it may be useful. And Gandalf's like, it may not. Can you imagine Sauron just being like, my ultimate construction, and wizard, and this damn wizard is like, yeah, it's probably not useful. And some hobbits like, it may be useful, and he's just rolling in his grave. Sauron's like, seriously? You think it may be useful? I have all my dominating will in there. So funny. I don't know why I find that funny. It's just such a blasé way to talk about an item that is about to cause so much death. Ugh, I'm doing this video in so many takes because I'm also painting a bunch of stuff and waiting for layers to dry. Okay. Now, I really love the way that, maybe this is just Bilbo, but essentially Bilbo leaves Frodo most things, but seems to give away a lot to people. And not only give them away, but it's kind of like he gives them away for certain reasons. So for Adelard Took, for his very own, an umbrella. Because Adelard's apparently steals umbrellas all the time. For Dora Baggins, for Milo Burrows, he gave an ink bottle because Milo never answered letters. And it's kind of like, I love this idea for wills, and in our society, culture, in mine, anyway, we tend to like leave 100% of everything that we own to our offspring or to our next of kin. And it's just, I think it's quite a refreshing idea to have a society that is a lot more open to wills that will give a lot away to friends and extended family more than the immediate family. And also it's just so cute because Bilbo actually had a reason for giving every specific item to a specific person, which just makes it better. And maybe that's a little, but that could be just so lovely. Like the day that you die, let's say that you remember that you had a lamp in your house that you know one of your friends used to always comment on and liked. You could give them that lamp. Or, yeah, I don't know, just, it's just like a nice little thing to be remembered by, because we're all going to be forgotten one day. And I don't know, I always wonder if like we live on in memory and if that's really worth something, you know, but still, it's a fun idea. Even if we had the rule like of all the things that you own when you die, the 80-20 rule, 80% can go to your next of kin to do with what they will, and 20% of your belongings in some way or another go to, I don't know, charities or friends. Friends who would need it, friends who you like. It was very satisfying to see the Sackville Bagginses very annoyed at seeing the will and seeing that Frodo definitely is in the will. I'm definitely on Frodo's side here, even though I'm like, well, it is a lot to inherit and maybe Bilbo could have shared a little bit more. I mean, it seems like he shared a lot anyway, but it was very good to see them cut down because they said here on page 47, after waiting 60 years, and all they get is like spoons. There's a little moment here between Gandalf and Frodo regarding the ring. Be careful. It may have other powers than just making you vanish when you wish to. Frodo's like, I don't understand. Neither do I, answered the wizard. And I've merely begun to wonder about the ring, especially since last night. So he doesn't know it's the One Ring. He knows it's the ring of power that makes people disappear, and he knows it's the one that Gollum had, and Gollum became very possessive over it, but he doesn't know it's that. He doesn't know it's Sauron's ring. Keep it safe, keep it secret. And then Gandalf goes on to basically say that I shan't often be visiting the Shire openly again. And Gandalf gives the excuse that he thinks that he's not particularly loved anymore around here. Like he's being known as the disturber of the peace, which is also in the movies, which is funny. But I think it's because he doesn't want to be seen in the Shire, because if the shadows are lengthening and growing, he doesn't really want the hobbits of the Shire to fall under suspicion because he's hanging around there a lot. I guess Gandalf is off and says, look for me in the unexpected times. So Gandalf basically just says, keep it safe and secret, and then leaves. For how long, I don't know. I'm just trying to remember what happens in the movie, and I can't actually remember what happens next. Frodo thought the old wizard looked unusually bent, as if he was carrying a great weight. The evening was closing in, and his cloaked figure quickly vanished into the twilight. Frodo did not see him again for a long time. And then that's the end of chapter, going into chapter 2, Shadows of the Past. And I think Frodo ends up having to leave the Shire by himself. Or does Gandalf come back? I don't know. Anyway, reflecting on this chapter, I think the things that most intrigued me was comparing the differences between the movie and the book. Frodo seems less innocent here. Gandalf and Bilbo seem just in general a little bit more jolly in the book as well. Bilbo was quite dark in the movie, and I think he was less dark in the book. And I guess I'm always just intrigued about how the ring has affected Bilbo for the 60-something years that he's had it. Like, in the end, he seemed to be able to get rid of it pretty quickly. So that is a remarkable feat. If he had it for 60 years, and yeah, he kind of didn't want to put it on the mantelpiece, but it was a 2-minute conversation with Gandalf. Gandalf basically saying no, like being a little bit threatening and intimidating. But that's all it took for Bilbo to pretty much completely forget about it and be like, thank God it's over with. Which I think is only possible because he's a hobbit, because he's Bilbo. So perhaps that's why Gandalf missed it. Like, because he would expect that over 60 years that, I mean, what we do know is that the ring was used to preserve things, right? Because Celebrimbor made the original rings of power to preserve the elves so that they wouldn't fade. So assuming that the One Ring seems to kind of have the same effect, even though Sauron didn't really necessarily need to have the effect of avoiding the elves fading, because I don't think he would have cared, but it's like it does the same thing. It has preserved Bilbo's physical being, his Hroa. I don't know if it's called that for hobbits, but if the ring had been in the hands of a man, a human, maybe much more strife would have been caused, which would mean that Gandalf would have clued on as to the evil nature of the ring sooner. But because hobbits are such a good barrier, he's just like, it's probably just made by some lesser elf sometime. Just another ring of power. Anyway, I'll be back for chapter 2.